They're taking fire with the suspect shooting at police.
And then an hours-long standoff. A police negotiator speaking with the shooter, identified as 25-year-old Michael Xavier Johnson, an Army veteran.
The suspect said he was upset at white people. The suspect stated he wanted to kill white people, especially white officers.
But the talks break down.
The suspect has told our negotiators that the end is coming, and he's going to hurt and kill more of us.
Onto the Black Lives Matter webpage. You know, I always want to go to the source if possible, and here in the About section, we are expansive. We are a collective of liberators who believe in an inclusive and spacious movement. We also believe that in order to win and bring as many people with us along the way, we must move beyond the narrow nationalism that is all too prevalent in black communities. Here's where you need to understand, these are communists, which is international socialist. They do not believe in nation states. In fact, they are so narrow-minded that they believe only socialism exists. They can't comprehend conservatism where individuals have rights. They believe only the collective can have power. Anytime, like for example, in the 2016 election, Democrats called many on the right Nazis and racist and fascist. So in order to be a Nazi, you have to first of all be a socialist, because that's what the word really means. It means national socialist, as opposed to communist, which are international socialist. So many people who voted for Trump were kind of taken back by being called fascist and Nazis, because it had no relevance to who we are at all. So anyway, they must move beyond the narrow nationalism that is all too prevalent in black communities. So they're saying that black people are too nationalistic, black people love their country, and therefore black people need to have their minds changed. You can't be loving your country, how dare you? We affirm the lives of black, queer, and trans folk, disabled folks, undocumented folks, folks with records, women, and all black lives along the gender spectrum. So they get into the we are collective, we are communist, and then they say, and then they go for the radical viewpoint. The radical viewpoint is the tip of the spear. They want to keep all eyes focused on this radical, we want illegals, we want the queer, trans, we want to bring you people to the top of our organization. As we'll see in a little bit, they'll talk about that. And while our eyes are on that tip of the spear, they're getting all these other laws passed, which are also radical, because they do want to destroy this country and all the countries of the world before they remake them in the communist model. They are actually passing legislation which will destroy this country while our eyes are transfixed on radical, insane ideas that they are just throwing out there. Our network centers those who have been marginalized within black liberation movements. I guess they mean the black liberation movements of the past, where homosexuals were put to the side and put in the background of the movement or whatever. We are working for a world, remember they're globalists, they're communists. We're working for a world where black lives are no longer systematically targeted for demise. Well, wouldn't that be nice? So who is targeting them? I think it's Black Lives Matter is targeting them. So now we're going to the section, what we believe. We see ourselves as part of the global black family. And that is, remember in William Du Bois, that's what he wanted. He wanted a ethno-communist state. I guess, you know, so you have the black communist state, and then you have the white communist state, and then the Asian communist state. And we just all just get along, all so happy. Also equal and equally miserable. We see ourselves as a part of the global black family, and we are aware of the different ways we are impacted or privileged as black people who exist in different parts of the world. We are guided by the fact that all black lives matter, regardless of actual or perceived sexual identity. And so here we go with the communism and the sexual confusion. Same patterns repeating itself every page. We are guided by the fact that all Black Lives Matter, regardless of active or perceived sexual identity, gender expression, economic status, ability, disability, religious beliefs or disbeliefs, immigration status, or location. We make space for transgender brothers and sisters to participate and lead. We are self-reflexive and do the work required to dismantle cisgender privilege and uplift Black trans folk, especially Black trans women, which I think means men who became women. So they really promote, if I'm correct in what they mean by that, they really promote Black men wanting to become women, especially Black trans women who continue to be disproportionately impacted by trans antagonistic violence. Is that true? We build a space that affirms Black women and is free from sexism, misogyny. What are these made up words, these socialist terms? And environments in which men are centered. Oh, we can't have men centered unless they're transgender and Black. We practice empathy. And what is empathy? Is empathy me feeling what you feel? You know, there's such a thing as sympathy, in which I can see that someone has a need, and I can see that maybe there's something I could do to help them stand on their own 2 feet and get along on their own way. And it might be tough love. But empathy, what does that imply? That implies that I need to feel something. And generally, it means that I need to feel bad for someone. And so it says we practice empathy. So you feel bad for people, I guess, is what it means. We engage comrades. Remember now, they're socialists, they're communists. We engage comrades with the intent to learn about and connect with their context. Now I have to go out on a limb here and try to understand what they mean by this. And I'm assuming context means their history, how they were abused as a kid, and that's why they became trans or whatever, and connect with and place them up on a pedestal. We make our spaces family friendly and enable parents to fully participate with their children. That's nice. You enable parents to fully participate with their children. Make your spaces family friendly. Okay, that's cool. We dismantle the patriarchal practice which requires mothers to work double shifts. Now wait a minute. It was the women's movement which brought about all of this women going to work and having equal rights. But they're saying it's a patriarchal practice that the men put on women. You go work and then you come home and you work doing the work of a mother. You know, communists created this women's movement. They paid women to go out and march and do all these stupid protests for a little extra money. And they created these laws and a society. They did social engineering in which women were educated into going for careers instead of family, and they basically destroyed our ability to reproduce properly in America and other white majority countries. But they're saying it's because of a patriarchy. Well, so basically they're lying. We dismantled the patriarchal practice that requires mothers to work double shifts so that they can mother in private even as they participate in public justice work. Now, justice work, that is protesting. So I guess they're getting paid to protest through organizations such as Black Lives Matter. They get paid to protest and do violence. That's basically what justice means to these people, these radicals. They are radical. We disrupt the Western prescribed. Let me say this a little slower. We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages. Oh, you remember that book that Hillary Clinton wrote, It Takes a Village, I think the name of it is? And then she went on a speaking tour making hundreds of thousands of dollars talking about a global village. We foster a queer-affirming network. When we gather, we do so with the intention of freeing ourselves from the tight grip of heteronormative thinking, or rather the belief that all in the world are heterosexual unless he or she, I'm surprised they used the words he or she, unless he or she disclose otherwise. Well, and I'm also glad that they defined that, so I didn't have to make up a definition for you, because some of these ideologies are just way out there. So heteronormative thinking, I think heteronormatively. I just assume people are heterosexual unless they tell me otherwise. I mean, so what? We cultivate an intergenerational and communal network free from ageism. Really. We believe that all people, regardless of age, show up with the capacity to lead and learn. Wow. That's pretty obvious. We embody and practice justice, which means violence, liberation, which means freedom from work and getting reparations probably, and peace in our engagements with one another. So try to avoid black on black crime. Black Lives Matter has been funded by the Borealis Philanthropy Group. It says here on the Borealis web page, our grant-making initiatives, Black-Led Movement Fund, Fund for Trans Generations, Immigration Litigation Fund, Transforming Movements Fund. In other words, I guess like the Black Lives Matter movement. For generations, Black-led social justice institutions have been under-resourced and their leaders have not received adequate support. As a new generation of leaders shape the conversation about race, criminalization, state, and gender violence in the United States, the Black-led Movement Fund, BLMF, aims to transform the scenario by supporting intersectional Black-led organizing and their leaders as they build and activate bases of power in local communities. Funding priorities, the BLMF supports organizations working to advance the vision of young Black, queer, feminist, and immigration leaders. In particular, we prioritize funding organizations who are actively leading and anchoring the movement for Black lives. So, the Borealis Philanthropy Fund for Trans Generations. Background: the Fund for Trans Generations, FTG, was created by a diverse group of funders to ensure that frontline trans activists and organizations have the financial resources and engagement needed to advance to the safety, security, and rights of trans people. The fund's grant making is informed by and responsive to trans communities and movements. The current funders are Arcus Foundation, the Laughing Gull Foundation, Novo Foundation, and anonymous donors. Learn about the COVID-19 Collective Fund for Trans Communities here. The Borealis Philanthropy for Immigration Litigation Fund. The fund supports impact litigation efforts that challenges discriminatory, unlawful, and overly punitive immigration enforcement policies and practices at any stage of the enforcement trajectory, from identification and apprehension to detention and removal, as well as efforts to exclude certain immigrants from entering the country. The ILF is a collaborative effort of the Ford Foundation, JPB Foundation, Novo Foundation, Open Society Foundations, that's the George Soros, Open Borders, Reese Foundation, and anonymous donors. And the Borealis Philanthropy Transforming Movements Fund. The Transforming Movements Fund supports the bridging role that LGBTQ leaders are playing across movements, helping movements to be more connected, inclusive, and thus more powerful. To do this, the TMF supports individual LGBTQ leaders as well as the organizations where they make their political homes. The fund was started in 2015 and grew out of recognition that LGBTQ people have long history of pushing movements to embrace the intersections of identities and necessity of alliances. The TMF supports grantees who deeply understand that the issues we are confronting as a society, whether that's community safety or reproductive justice. So I guess that's protesting and violence, violent reproduction, or immigrant rights, do not exist in isolation from each other. The leaders and organizations we fund are on the front lines of challenging, interlocking, and intersecting systems of oppression. Cross-issue organizing makes systemic change more impactful and long-lasting. The TMF is a collaborative effort of the Arcus Foundation, Cricket Island Foundation, the Ford Foundation, Foundation for a Just Society, the Overbrook Foundation, and anonymous donors. I will never again buy a Ford. We also provide leadership development support through the Young Trans Women of Color grant-making program, which invests in trans leaders who are organizing across movements and issues. I mean, seriously, what percentage of the U.S. population are young trans women of color? The TMF supports local, regional, and national organizations, networks working across intersections of LGBTQ liberation, racial justice, and gender justice.